Dean Curry here, Fantasy Football, RSVP, introducing the debut of trade targets for Week 11. Buy low, sell high. This is a very important segment that we're doing because every so often, when you're doing research on the internet, you might actually see a buy low, sell high article or things like that. But you know what I really don't see? I mean, you might see a little information, like maybe 2 or 3 players, or maybe a handful of players, 4 or 5 players that are buy low, sell high for that week, or week 10 or week 11. You might see that, but you know what you really don't see? A list of like 30 players on a buy. Let me explain what a buy low is. A buy low is when you buy a player that's low that you think is going to really explode. And a sell high is when you sell a player that's doing really well that you think is going to tail off. And this is what makes a great trade. And I've really given great advice on trades and pulled off so many trades for people on our website, www.fantasyfootball.com. There's lots of free information and videos like this, and anyone could go on it and have fun. But there's also an exclusive group on there where people speak to me directly on Skype, and I give them, or they email me, and we have group chats also, and there's all these special benefits. And it's not expensive. It's $7.77. It's like 20 cents a day equivalent. And people get to speak to me directly on Skype for 7 minutes, lucky number 7. Or they email me their lineup and we work on trades together. And it's just so valuable because what I find is a lot of people try to do trades, but they're not always that successful at getting the players they want. And, I've really mastered the art of doing that, and it's well worth it. But there's also on the website videos like this where I'm just, telling you the types of players you should pick, and it's free. And you could also join our Facebook page, for free, and there's little chats in there. But, what I don't see a lot of is podcasts that really talk and list like 30 players that you could buy low and like 30 players you could buy high each and every week. And it gives you a great diversity. So I'm debuting this buy low, sell high trade targets for week 11. And really subscribe to my channel, not because I'm saying subscribe, but I'm going to come out with this every week. And I'm telling you, I don't see a lot of information out there where you're listing 30 players. So let's try to get through it. I'll try to get through it in about 20-25 minutes. Let's start with a quarterback, Carson Wentz. He's more of a buy medium, not a buy low. But, he's been putting up consistent numbers in the low to mid 20s as quarterback for fantasy football, which is good. But what people don't realize is when he was really cooking last year, he was putting up mid 30s, and he's got a few favorable, teams coming up in the near future. But things are the fact that they got Golden Tate, and they have Aguilar, and Aguilar doesn't play that well. But if you notice, and I spoke about this last week, when you put a Tate in there, all of a sudden Aguilar becomes a more viable option because he's not as covered, which was the case last week where he was almost becoming non-existent in the offense. All of a sudden, he sort of came alive in fantasy football, and I said that might happen. And I also said that, having a Golden Tate out there and an Aguilar, and I'm not singing Aguilar's praises, but he was very good touchdown-wise last year, and he's a good receiver. Not great, but he's a pretty good receiver. And, when you put in a Tate that demands attention, all of a sudden Aguilar goes from a good receiver to a really good receiver because he's not receiving as much attention. And Carson Wentz saw that. And now, they were just double-teaming Alshon Jeffrey every game. And when you have Aguilar and you have Tate, you're not going to really be able to do that anymore. So I really think Alshon Jeffrey's numbers are going to climb too. And right now, he had low double-digit points last week. you might want to pick up Alshon Jeffrey and load him and pair him with Carson Wentz. At this stage of the game, I don't talk a lot about quarterbacks because there's not a lot of quarterback trading late in the season. You can pick up quarterbacks on waivers, of course, but there's not a lot of quarterback trading. But Carson Wentz might be someone that you might actually be able to find, along with a Deshaun Jackson, whose numbers have not been great, but he has a favorable schedule coming up, and I really like Demaryius Thomas being on that team now. Another buy low candidate that you might want to consider, because although Fuller stretches the field, Demaryius Thomas is a physical runner. And what happens more with the Demaryius Thomas is, although Will Fuller is very quick and all that stuff, Demaryius Thomas, it's what he does after he catches the ball, assuming he doesn't drop it, which has been a problem for him. But he's a physical runner, and they have to put attention towards him. It might actually open things up for DeAndre Hopkins as well, or Kiki Cutie as well, because what happens is they have to put guys near Demaryius Thomas, because in case he catches the ball, it's hard to tackle him with one guy. So I really think Deshaun Jackson's numbers are going to come up. And if you want another quarterback out there, you probably won't be able to get him. He's not really a buy low anymore, is Russell Wilson. And I think, he's probably not even on this list now, because his numbers has continued to climb. But you never know. Sometimes people have Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. It's two quarterbacks on their team, and they might part with a Russell Wilson. But I think Russell Wilson's numbers are going to climb really well, and I only even mention him in this buy low category because he's starting to run the ball. He wasn't running the ball all year, and that's why he had high fantasy numbers, because he gets 75 to 100 yards, and now he's starting to do that. And another buy low candidate on this list is Doug Baldwin, because Doug Baldwin's been in people like, oh, he's terrible. He's not terrible. He's a great fantasy football player, but his numbers are continually climbing. And now Coach Carroll came out this week and he said, watch out for a breakout for Doug Baldwin, because he's finally healthy. And when I hear that, and they're mentioning that, and even Doug Baldwin said it too in a report, you might want to pick up Doug Baldwin. You can get him cheap right now. You have Emmanuel Sanders. You also have Cortland Sutton. They have easy schedules coming up, and you might want to consider, I think weeks 13 to 16, they play Cincinnati, San Francisco, Cleveland, and Oakland. I mean, need I say more? And Emmanuel Sanders is in there, and he's, had a week off, so he's getting healthy. And Cortland Sutton replacing Demaryius Thomas, and they're just crazy about this guy, out there. So you might want to consider picking him up. Duke Johnson, as mentioned in previous weeks and mentioning here, Coach Williams is really trying to showcase Duke Johnson. And what I'll do is I'll give you about 10 or so buy lows, and then I'll give you about 10 or so sell highs, and then I'll go back to another 10 or so buy lows, and then more sell highs. Dalvin Cook looked really good last game, put up low double-digit numbers on fantasy. And people forget how special this guy really is. He's truly special, and it's not what he does in the running game, which is looking better and better, and their defense is looking better and better in Minnesota, which is only going to give them more opportunities. But Dalvin Cook, it's what he does receiving that people forget about, that he could make a huge, difference. And even if they're ahead in games, they're still going to dump it off to him 5 or 10 yards. A buy low risk could be a Rob Gronkowski. And I'm only mentioning him in case maybe you have a decent tight end. You could probably get him really cheap. His name still carries a lot of weight, but he's been injured. You might be able to pick him up, and maybe they're just resting him for later in the season. But that's a bit of a risky play. Let's go to the sell high candidates. One that's always on my sell high list would be Tyreek Hill. Great player, great offense. But, the thing with Tyreek Hill is they have 2 easy games against Oakland, But even in those games against Oakland, you have to think they're going to be way ahead. They may not even be throwing the ball. They may just be handing it off and dumping it off to Kelsey because they're up huge. So you have to look at game scripts. It's very, very important. And, they also play the Rams, Baltimore, the Chargers, whose defense is getting healthier and healthier with Bosa coming back, in Seattle, who's actually been playing really good defense. And, you have to think that Keenan Allen is one of those players. He's a special player, but he also could put up 30, 35 one week and then 8 the next. And that's just what you don't want with fantasy football. You want a guy, I would rather have a guy that gives me 15 to 18 every week than a guy that puts up 30 and then puts up 8. Because when he puts up 30, you're going to win. But when he puts up 8, you're probably going to lose that week. And this has been the knock on Tyreek Hill for a long, long time. And right now he put up a big number, so you might want to consider getting rid of him. Another big name you might want to consider getting rid of is Keenan Allen. It scares me that Keenan Allen is getting 5 or 6 receptions a game. That scares me. And now it's been going on the whole season. When it was the first few weeks, I was like, he usually finishes strong. And it may look like he's finishing strong, but don't forget, the last 2 weeks, he still only had 5 or 6 receptions. But he had a running play that turned into a touchdown and, a catch that winded up turning into a touchdown. Otherwise, the last 2 weeks, although his numbers look like they're higher, you take those touchdowns away, he's sort of becoming a touchdown dependent. His numbers really weren't that great. And he keeps getting 5. And I watched a few games this year, of not just highlights, but the whole game of, the Chargers. And it just, there's a few games in there that are coming up. And look at the schedule by all means. There's a few games coming up where they're going to be ahead. And if they're ahead, they're just going to be, running the ball. And I'll get more back to, Keenan Allen. He's a little later in my list, but I just want to mention you may want to, consider unloading him for maybe one of my buy high, buy low, candidates. Another guy you might want to consider getting rid of is Mark Ingram. I know a lot of people love Mark Ingram, but, it seems like he's only getting carries when there's a blowout, like last week in week 10. And it seems like, and this happened last year too, it seemed like he was getting a lot of play in blowouts where they would just give it to him and they would, give it to Kamara when it really mattered. And they have some, easy game. They have some tough games coming up on their schedule. And the fact that they have some tough games coming up on their schedule means that the games might be a little bit closer. And if the games are a little bit closer, you might want to think they're going to give it to Kamara like they did at the end of last year. It just seemed like they were going to Kamara more and more. And Ingram had a good week last week. He put up a huge score, high 20s, and you might want to consider unloading him right now. Another player I think you should unload is Tariq Cohen. It's so typical. I was saying, he's getting these high numbers. Everyone's talking about Tariq Cohen. Tariq Cohen, they're not even using Jordan Howard. But the thing with Nagy, their coach, is he actually switches the players up each week based on, the team he's playing. And I'm not saying, he's an excellent coach. But it's not good for fantasy football because I kept saying, sooner or later he's going to put up like a 5 and not even used in the game. And sure enough, 2 weeks ago, it's exactly what happened. And I was calling that. And then last week, he did a little bit better, got a touchdown in there. But, he has enough good numbers where you could unload him because it's just too hard to predict that Jordan Howard, Cohen, who are they going to play? And, it's sometimes they use him a lot, sometimes not at all. And you just don't want that being unpredictable like that. Another one that's unpredictable, I'll throw in at tight end, is Austin Hooper. It looks like they're using him right now. They have a tendency to use him a little bit more towards the end of the year in playoffs. But he's one of those tight ends where he puts up a huge number one week and a low number the next week. And, sometimes it's just better to find a tight end that's putting up, gives you like 10 points, but he's going to give you 10 points, every single week. Someone like Jack Doyle, his numbers are going to climb, and Ebron's numbers are going to go down. But you might want to consider, a Jack Doyle, because, Ebron's got those matchups coming up, which I mentioned, and I think Jack Doyle's numbers are going to climb. And he's one of those guys that's easily could get you 4 or 5 catches and 50 yards, get you 10 points, maybe throwing a touchdown, but consistent. Consistency is not something easy to find at tight end this year, but you could find it in a guy like, I'd rather have Jack Doyle than Austin Hooper, believe it or not. Tevin Coleman, if you own him, you might want to dump him right now because he's in a contract year and they're really falling in the playoff hunt. And, some people think they're out of it already, and they're not mathematically out of it, but it's going to be very hard. And when they start playing meaningless games at the end of the season with Coleman in a contract year and not bringing him back next year, they're going to want to see, what they have in Ito Smith. So I think Ito Smith, you'll probably pick him up on waivers right now. Might be a good waiver play. His numbers are actually going to, Coleman's numbers are going to go down. And if you could get any value for him, I would let him go. Along with Tyler Boyd for Cincinnati, I would sell him high right now because he's going to start getting double teamed. And teams are just going to load up on him, and there's really no one else, Ross, to throw to. So Tyler Boyd, I think his numbers, as they were last week, if you could get anything for him, you might want to let him go. 3 running backs that I would let go right now is Kerryon Johnson, Marlon Mack, and Adrian Peterson. All of them have really, really tough schedules coming up. I don't want to take up too much time talking about each team they're going to play, but, they're playing teams like Chicago, Minnesota, Jacksonville, all of them. And look at all their remaining games are just brutal schedule. And, you could really probably get a ton for those players right now because they scored so much. And, you might want to really consider getting rid of them because they're big names, especially Adrian Peterson. Okay, let's go back to the buy low side. You have Demaryius Thomas, which is not a great pick for me, but you might want to stash him, see his numbers as he gets familiar with the offense. They might continue to climb. Along with Golden Tate, I'm not so sure I would play him right away. Wait to see as he gets going. His numbers are going to climb. Both have favorable matchups coming up. You might want to look at Juju Smith. I don't think I would call him a buy low, or Robert Woods. They're more buy mediums, but their numbers kind of dwindled down a little bit, but I think they'll both finish strong. James White had a bad week next week. You might be able to pick him up. Gronkowski's been injured. Joe Mixon's numbers have come down. I'm mentioning these now. They're not really buy lows, but they're buy mediums. But someone you might be able to pick up is Mike Evans. I really think, the reason why I like Mike Evans is his targets are high. He's getting double-digit targets every game, but they're just not connecting. Fitzmagic is just getting in there. They're going to be behind in a lot of games, and I really think they're going to start connecting sooner or later. Let's go back to the buy low. The sell high side. If you have Odell Beckham, you might want to consider letting him go. The Giants' offense, I'm from New York. Giants' offense has really been inept, and they have tough games coming up in Philadelphia, Chicago, Washington, Tennessee, and Dallas. That's just a brutal schedule. And, they have a great secondaries, all those teams and corners. And Odell Beckham, I've never been a huge fantasy. I'm a huge fan of his, New York fan. But as far as fantasy numbers, his numbers, and it's not necessarily his fault, they have offensive line woes. It's hard for Manning to get the ball to him. And his numbers tend to be really inconsistent. He'll put up a 30 one week or a 20 and then like a couple of low numbers. And right now he's put up a couple of big weeks. So it might be a good time to really unload him. A lot of people talk about Kevin Golladay as being a really, great guy to pick up, but he's got a brutal schedule coming up against Carolina, Chicago, the Rams, Arizona, Minnesota, and an underrated defense with Green Bay. Green Bay's defense sometimes plays well, sometimes not so much, but sometimes they play really well on defense. And, they just, Detroit doesn't, look like they have things figured out. I thought they'd be a little better this year. A sell high candidate, also I doubt you'll be able to get much for him is LaShawn McCoy. He put up a huge number last week, and he also has a big name, so people might think, oh, he's really starting to get going. And, I watched the Get to Jet game, and it just looked like, from New York, root for the New York teams and other teams as well. But it just looked like the Jets gave up, and I really doubt LaShawn McCoy is going to have another big week. He's got a big name. You might be able to get something for him. I mentioned Ebron before. He's got some tough matchups coming up against Tennessee, Jacksonville, Houston, and Dallas. And even an underrated New York Giants defense, which actually has been playing pretty well, considering the Giants have not been playing well. And a lot of scores in the Giants games have actually been low-scoring games. And they're really good on that stretch play, and that's how Ebron gets his points. So I think his numbers might go down. T.Y. Hilton, if you can get him on the buy side, I mentioned him previously. He's one of my star guys you could pick up. I really think he's getting healthy. And towards the end of our list, we have a couple of other players here. Amari Cooper, I don't even know if he's a buy low anymore because his numbers are starting to climb, but I think they'll climb more. And I think Dak Prescott, it's actually available on a lot of people's leagues still. And you might want to consider picking him up at quarterback because his numbers might climb. I think they will. He's put up some good fantasy numbers before. AJ Green might be a buy low. He could also be a sell high. It depends on how a lot of people don't want a guy in a trade that's injured, but you might be able to get AJ Green, and they're saying he might be back in 3 weeks. But during the playoffs, he might actually be healthy enough to give you good numbers. Doug Baldwin, as I mentioned to you, is Coach Carroll is really talking about how the first time during the whole season he's actually healthy. And then back on the sell high, Allen Robinson, he's just injured all the time. The guy can't stay healthy, and he had a huge monster week last week. And I really think that you might want to, sell him now before he gets injured again. And their receiver White might actually be the number one there going forward. He's probably available on your waivers if you want to pick him up. Corey Davis, although I must say Mariota's been looking really well lately, and if he's on your waiver wire, you may want to consider picking him up. Corey Davis is very inconsistent. You never know what their coach is going to do of Vrabel. He sometimes, if he has a lead, he protects it and just tries to run and do really short plays. And it's not really Corey Davis' game, and he doesn't stretch the field. And then other games, it looks like Mariota's opening up and throwing to him. But Corey Davis, it's just not something, I would bet on Mariota before I would bet on Corey Davis, because sometimes they're just spreading the ball everywhere, and Corey Davis doesn't even get any plays, and then one day he does really well. Keenan Allen, I mentioned to you before, he's one of my star sell highs. I'm mentioning him again because I really think that you might want to consider unloading him for someone even better, because he is going against Arizona, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Denver. In Denver it could be underrated sometimes, especially at home. The defense plays well, and they just may be up in games, and sometimes they're just not involving him. I mean, I'm waiting for him to have 10 to 12 receptions, and it's just not happening. So now I'm starting to think it's not going to happen. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, his numbers are going to be low. They're just really spreading the ball out, and that's great for coaching and, making your team balanced, but they're not showcasing him the way they have in the past, and, it actually scares me. So this is your buy low, sell high. Subscribe to our channel because I'm going to do this, not because I'm saying subscribe, everyone on YouTube, subscribe. What I'm saying is, I'm going to do this every week. I'm going to come out with trade targets, buy low and sell high. And I'm telling you right now, I don't see it out there other than a handful of players. I mean, I just listed you about 25 to 30 players to focus on. And this is pivotal information. And if you want better information, go on our website. Definitely sign up, for the exclusive trading advice, Skype calls. I will help you win your league. I've done it over and over and over again for so many people, especially when it comes to trades. I will help you organize a trade to get the players you want. So pop on there. I will be back next week. This is Dean Curry. ICE will be joining us with videos coming up. We just launched everything. So the Curry and ICE show is coming up. I'm Curry, he's ICE. We're military, so we go by last names. And thank you for being a part of this channel. And I hope to deliver more and more information to you, and have a terrific day. And I hope you all win fantasy football this week.